A granny video? In this economy? Absolutely. Although my video is not one that's going to be your traditional kind where I deep dive into the rich history of Granny, its lore, and its many different games. There's a lot of videos out there for that exact purpose, and I feel like it isn't really worth repeating for the 10 millionth time. And even then, the 10 million's probably lowballing it considering how many people check out this kind of Granny stuff out. Yet despite how popular it is, it's still paradoxically devoid of much content discussing the game as a game. And I just find that strange. Oh, I almost forgot. Happy 10K! Thank you so much for subscribing. I really appreciate it. I really didn't think that I would get this far, as cliche as that sounds, but just know that I'm really thankful for all of you subscribing and for being here for me. It means a lot. Okay, back to granning out. What was that? Oh, right. Shit. Retention. Right. What do I have here? Oh. This'll do nicely. A blankie original. I call it infidelity. I know, hold your applause. What I'm saying is that you better have that damn video posted by the time I post this, purple dog, or I will find you. Granny. It is a video game. You know, when people usually make videos about Granny, they do so in the context of talking about its lore, characters, etc. But in my opinion, the lore of Granny is actually some of the least interesting parts of the series. Oh, a family got violently killed, and the granddaughter was a ghost, and the mother was actually a spider, and Nosferatu was there, and... Wait, is that Slender Man? Is that Jerma as Slender Man? Wait, never mind, this shit's actually kind of peak. Yeah, okay, no, never mind. The story's actually kind of goated. But the point I'm trying to make right now is that the gameplay of Granny is much more interesting to me personally than the lore and the overarching story that the series has. Either way, Purple Dog is going to be making a video on this game, allegedly, and I think he's going to cover the story and the community around Granny in a more comprehensive manner than I can anyway. What I'm interested in is... I would go so far as to say it's one of the most engaging horror games on a mechanical level yet made. Not because it's some kind of masterpiece in any stretch of the word, but because you can use a Roblox asset to flash freeze an elderly person to perform a hospice skip. Our table! But because of some actual reasonable reasons. Now, it doesn't have the set pieces nor budget of something like Outlast, but when you get down to brass tacks, what is Outlast really? Just running around and flipping switches, triggering scripted events in a linear manner, and avoid being sent down to the human being to Raspberry Jam pipeline until you get to the end. Same structure goes for a lot of horror games. The formula is typically the same for the vast majority of them. Run around, solve some puzzles, move on to the next area, and then get further into the game. Silent Hill, Dead Space, Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion, and a bunch more structure themselves in this exact same way. Now, that is not to say that these are bad games. God no, these are all very good in their own rights, and it's all about the quality of the execution of the actual game when it comes to the games, at the end of the day. I'm just highlighting how they, more or less, have the same linear approach to progress. This is the reason why something like Five Nights at Freddy's was seen as revolutionary during its debut in 2014, because it managed to stray away from the traditional horror framing, putting you in a chair and having to fend yourself against a bunch of robot furries. The only puzzles being how you figured out how the enemies worked, and the challenge being your luck and skill when you finally do figure it out, ceasing to be a horror game in favor of being a challenge resource management game with the occasional jump scare. Even straying away in a much more subtle way can get you really far, as was the case with Slender and the rise of protagonists with what I like to call little bitch syndrome, where usually horror games like Resident Evil, Dead Space, or Silent Hill at the very least let you defend yourself. Games like Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Slender, or Layers of Fear strayed away from most games at the time by basically making you completely helpless. Getting down to it, Slender's just the world's slowest collectathon, with a monster that you have to avoid eye contact with, like my typical audience member when confronted with a cashier. And yet, it was still able to completely take over the internet at the time. The point is that Granny's one of those games that really plays with what can be done with the structure of a horror game. Really just different and unique in how it does things. Kind of ahead of its time really, despite being pretty janky with charming visuals. It's essentially an escape room game. And doing something fresh with your game can get it really, really far. The developers of games like Vampire Survivors, Ultra Kill, Lethal Company, Undertale, and Balatro can attest to stuff like that. Granny was developed and released in 2017 to the Android and App Stores by the 50-year-old Developer, a Swedish developer, or so the wiki says, with a focus on mobile games who later got into PC ports after Granny's smash hit success really got cemented. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on the overall game design of Granny 1, since the main gameplay loop remains mostly the same throughout the trilogy, just the specifics of what Granny's house is like, the items inside, and the threats that you can face. Developer started making games in 2011, starting out with a little app called My Daily Expenses, basically letting you keep track of how much money that you spend on things like candy or makeup or whatever. He would later pivot away from apps like this and move towards horror gaming with the Slendrina series, which at the time had its own tiny little fan group, but it wouldn't be until 2017's Granny that Developer really hit the big time, Granny herself being voiced by Developer's wife, which is adorable, by the way. Now, I've been going on for a while about Granny this and Granny that, but I've never really elaborated on what it was. Well, Granny is essentially an escape room video game. I'm more partial to Roblox's cart ride into 17 pregnant hyenas myself, but you begin the game getting abducted by Granny. Having been wandering around in bumblefuck nowhere in the middle of the woods. Not without cause, however, because unknown to you, the player, you're actually here to repossess her house because she missed a rent payment by 10 minutes yesterday.
I don't care who the IRS sends, I am not paying taxes.
But the papers haven't come through yet, so she's using her castle doctrine right to club you over the head so you don't take her house. But the thing is, Granny's been having a little bit of empty nest syndrome, so instead of immediately gutting you, she decides to challenge you to a little game, something that she's evidently done before to who knows how many people. And that game? Escape before 5 days pass. Because little do you know, Granny was actually a French revolutionary, and she's going to give your landlording ass that United healthcare treatment. Hey, I'm not the one saying this. Granny is. Look, she even has a guillotine like a proper French revolutionary. That's a true hero of the people right there. And every time Granny catches you, she gets to knock your block off, moving you on to the next day. Now, this isn't the only way for you to take enough damage for a day to pass, but it's definitely the one that you'll be encountering the most often, at least the one that'll be inflicting the least psychic damage. The first room of Granny basically tells you everything you ought to know about this game. In the room is nothing but a vase, the door out, a closet, and a table. This is where you learn how the game works, along with the most important thing you'll have to deal with this entire game. There is only one inventory slot. This means that as you travel around the house, if you want to have multiple things with you, then you'd have to manually pick up, carry, and then put down all of your items back and forth from one part of the map to another. And okay, I'm being so real here right now. I have no clue why you refuse to use your other hand or pockets or something, so I'm gonna be headcanoning that you're this guy from Baki the Grappler, having recently developed psychic powers. Okay, back to the opening room. Granny's hearing. Granny's most defining trait as an enemy is her unnaturally good sense of hearing. Anytime something is in the house that makes a sound, no matter where it is and no matter how far away Granny is from it, Granny will always hear it and immediately drop everything to pursue the source of that sound. This can be doors opening, floorboards creaking, or any object hitting the ground and making noise. You can tell that Granny's rigged this house into a little pseudo-minefield, where nearly everything has been tampered with to make sound when you get near. The doors and the floor creak, the paintings hung on the walls fall down when you get close, and even the exits to the house have little sound makers built in, like this little bell activated by a tripwire by the front door, or the bumper of the car in the garage detaching when you get close. Granny will even go so far as to turn the house into an actual minefield, occasionally dropping bear traps that'll make a hell of a lot of sound and trap you if you're not careful. I don't know why you're still able to walk after being caught in one of those, but hey, could be psychic powers, I don't know. Nearly everything in the house is set up to give Granny an advantage, but that doesn't mean that it's unfair. Quite the opposite, in fact, because while her hearing is her greatest tool, it's also something that you can turn against her. What I'm saying is that we need to get gaslighting. Granny's hearing is great, and she'll chase after any noise made in the house. This means that if you play your cards right, you'll be spending most of your time making Granny go on wild goose chases. The game itself largely revolves around you gradually learning more and more about the house, exploring while juggling Granny to make sure that she doesn't get you. Learning the layout of the house is the most important part. Learn how to best navigate so you can throw down items to make Granny head to the areas farthest from where you want to go, giving you a lot of time to work. Now to balance this out, this is why DV Loper decided that you should only have one item slot. The game's goal is to gather all the appropriate items you need to open one of the many exits to the house. But by only letting you hold one item, if you go back to bring your tools with you, you will have to plan around Granny beelining straight to where you are, or more specifically, where you just dropped down an item. You'll need to plan around her, and the more items you bring along, the more round trips you're going to have to go on, which will risk more encounters with Granny, meaning that you'll have to risk going on a run where you don't have the means to defend yourself. You can bring along as many items as you like, but doing so will be both time-consuming and risky, so it promotes strategic placement of your items to make you put down your items in places that you think will be the most advantageous to your run, while being as sparing as you can be with these round trips. Now, I may have already said this, but this game rewards bullying. Most of the game is spent making Granny go off on wild goose chases, chasing things that aren't even there, like it's FNAF 3. And nothing highlights this better than the house gas chamber. Sauna. Most players will encounter this thing and be confused as to the purpose, but those in the know will know that this little room is actually a trap that you can set against Granny. By throwing down an item into the sauna in the garage and making noise, Granny will immediately beeline it straight into the sauna, after which you can lock her in and evolve your gaslighting into a gas leak, after which she will die. On an unrelated note, did you know that the most common cause of death over the age of 45 is accidents? Yeah, couldn't be me though. I'm doing this shit on purpose. Most of the game is spent gathering the you will need the right amount of so you can get to using the right combination of. And this game has a lot of items and a lot of places to find them, and the only way to escape is to find the right combination of items to use on your exit of choice. The game is pretty dynamic and pretty varied in how you're going to go about things, because your behavior and what exit you're going to be going for largely depends on what items that you get during your run, similar to the roguelikes like The Binding of YIIK or Risk of Rain. That is not to say that you'll be changing how you play if you were to pick up a weapon in, say, Hades, but as you gain access to different items, your priorities will change. If you find more items dedicated to a specific exit, you're more likely to change your plans in favor of another exit because of how many, say, pro front door items you get rather than the car exit items that you get early into the run. Either way, any progress is good progress. This doesn't just extend to what exit you're going to be going for either. Access to different types of items can change the game's dynamic and how you approach the game. I like to categorize the items in this game into 3 categories: door unlocking, exit unlocking, and parts and utility. Sometimes the items can fit into multiple categories at once, and other times they'll only have one purpose, be it only for unlocking a certain door, or giving you access to a specific item, or even giving you an extra life. Now, the puzzles in this game are really just roadblocks to progress. You can only really open them after finding a specific item. Well, all of them except for Granny's coin flip car bomb. The first 2 item categories, exit unlocking and door unlocking, or more accurately, area unlocking, do exactly that. Their main use cases are to open up new areas of the house, or to get you one step closer to opening an exit and therefore winning. But sometimes, these items can be used to get you access to this game's special sauce: the utility items. And by utility, I mean items that grant you the ability to turn this episode of Goosebumps into a shitty yard sale copy of Home Alone.
Hello.
Let me give you an example of just one of them. Like this game's very own Exodia, some of the utility items this game has have a collection mechanic, such as these Shotgun Parts 3, that you can assemble in the garage to turn Granny's uterus into soup. Although, Granny herself was raised so death is only a momentary obstacle. So being blasted in the face with a shotgun classifies as a minor inconvenience.
Do you have any ibuprofen? I got a headache.
Even blowing her up with gasoline will just have her back in less time than it takes for you to take a shit. The real purpose of the shotgun is not to kill Granny, but to perform the duties of a police officer when called to a house. Kill the homeowner's pets. And this is just one example of a utility item this game has to offer, not to mention other items that break the game's challenge completely, like the reusable animal tranquilizer crossbow, mace, and the weaponized Roblox spawn tile. Brutal. Now, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but that's enough about violence against the elderly. Instead, let's go back to violence against animals. Remember when I brought up shooting the family pets? Well, this example of justifiable violence is actually just one of the many scenarios that the game gives you to approach the same situation based on what items that you get. Instead of blasting these hellspawn into pulp, you can instead choose to feed them if you find the correct food. This is just an example of how the items that you roll or come across during your run determine how you play. If you only get the parts for the gun but not the meat, you could risk trying to blast the spider in the attic before it gets you, but this is much riskier than if you were to just find the meat and then use it to distract the spider while you either get the item or blast it anyway. And killing Granny's 8-legged hellspawn, or furniture enshittener, among other things, will enrage her, making her faster and turning her into a heat-seeking geriatric ICBM. And that's how the vast majority of the game will play out. Load in, find your items, get chased, gaslight, gas leak, gatekeep Granny, and keep at it until you win. A surprisingly fun take at a game when you get down to it. Now, there's also something so special in my mind about the size of the house, because while the game world itself is relatively small compared to most games on the market, it manages to have its own special charm and variety despite being so small. It takes advantage of how horror is easier to achieve with claustrophobic environments and restricted movement while not falling victim to area bloat like other games like Hello Neighbor. The game's content is kept in a small overall house area, with lots of intersecting routes and hidden pathways connecting different parts of the house. By using a smaller overall area, the developer had to make the best use of all of the limited area that he could, to condense as much relevant and interesting game content into the few rooms the game has to make sure that there's as little useless dead area as possible, unlike other games that have massive bloated scale without enough worthwhile content to justify it. And there isn't too much content to Granny, but what is there is still interesting enough to keep the game engaging for what it is, without unnecessary map or scale bloat. And I suppose that this is sort of what makes Granny separate from most of mascot horror, if you could even really categorize it as such, since Granny isn't exactly the kind of thing that you would expect to find as a Happy Meal toy. But I kinda do have a few game theories as to why Granny managed to become such a massive hit as it did, because Granny first released back in November of 2017. Oh god, that's 7 years old going on 8, holy shit. Sorry. But FNAF had also recently released in 2014, 3 years prior. The mascot horror scene hadn't properly established itself yet, but you could see its subgenre pioneers getting started, with Bendy and the Ink Machine releasing in February 2017, and Hello Neighbor releasing in the same year in December. And that's where the main fan base of this game really started funneling into Granny. Because we all know that most Granny players were, and typically are, young children, wanting to get their hands on a new game like Bendy, FNAF, or Hello Neighbor. But the fact remains that those games were typically PC exclusive, and costed money to buy, which limited a lot of kids' abilities to actually play these games themselves, opting instead to watch YouTube videos on them. Real fans of things never actually play the game. They just watch a fuck ton of YouTube videos about it and get the lore arguments online. But the point was what was available to these kids were free mobile games, and Granny just so happened to be in the right place at the right time. Kids who can't pay for games or didn't have access to the hardware to play them would play the free mobile game, which was similar enough to what they wanted, but they would stay when they found out that the game was actually good in its own right. And that's not even mentioning the massive force multiplier content creators would be for Granny's popularity. Content farms and, dare I invoke the name of evil itself, Elsagate-style content, which, while esoteric and incredibly weird, was and continues to be incredibly popular with kids. Shit like Granny versus Baby Granny versus Teenager Granny, funny horror animation by funny horror animation gets ridiculous amounts of views. Look at that 81 mil right there, that's insanity. And these types of content farm numbers in the millions are everywhere, and therefore, the game is everywhere, visible and easily accessible because while not everyone has a PC, everyone has a phone to play it on.
Do you guys not have phones?
Am I saying that this is a good thing? No. If anything, making stuff like this is likely one of the steps outlined in How to Go to Hell in Every Religion, in parenthesis, detailed instructions. What I am saying is every few years, new mascot horror content comes out, be it Ban Ban, Bendy, Indigo, Security Breach, and this influx of new kids translates over and funnels into Granny content, which is enhanced further by actual peak content from people like Queso, and the Granny Ouroboros completes another cycle. And that is why Granny... Why did I make this video? Oh yeah. Oh god. Oh, what the hell? Where did all you come from? Oh yeah, I'll do it. Thank you all for 10,000 subscribers. Yeah, Granny time's over now, but I just want to thank everyone who submitted their OCs to my 10,000 subscriber special drawing thing. The selections ended on Christmas, but basically what happened is that I wanted to thank every one of my viewers for 10k subs, so I decided to let them submit their OCs to my Discord, where, over time, I'll show off the drawings to them when it's finished. They'll also be there at the end of my videos with any fan art I get. On the off chance that I ever, maybe, may not, probably not ever, get to 100,000, I may or may not do an embarrassing karaoke stream, which I know is never going to happen, so my pipes are completely quite safe. Okay, you can go now.